Hi, and welcome to Real Trail Talk. I am Donovan Souza from The Long Ways Better.
And I'm Mark Pybus from The Life of Pi. Welcome to episode 66. It is my great pleasure to introduce Alan de Souza, father of Donovan.
Yeah, we've got him in not just because he is my dad, but he's a risk expert. So we've got him in to talk about today's episode because he's probably the right person for this.
Thank you very much for the welcome.
So I'm going to enjoy this quite a bit, but we'll get on to the topic at hand, which is risk. So Alan, do you just want to run us through risk as a concept and also like public perceptions and technical definitions of risk?
Sure. So risk, by definition, is the effect of uncertainty on your objectives. So a lot of it depends on what your objectives are. So if an individual, your objectives in walking might be to climb up a mountain to have a nice look at a view, enjoy the trail along the way, whereas the state government or federal government looking after the parks in which you walk, they'd be managing the risk of providing the facilities along the way and perhaps looking after the safety risks and how much it costs and how much their reputation might be impacted. So there's a lot of aspects of risk. But I guess in this context that we're talking about, we are looking at risk with walking. So what an individual can do, what organizations like the departments can do in terms of providing the infrastructure, or just encouraging people to walk.
Cool, I guess there's different public perceptions of what government's role is in this and where the line is. When people talk about what they want on a trail, you could be like the completely safe trail where everything's all, paved roads, it's all fenced off, or maybe it's in like a glass box or something so you just can't get injured. And then there's the extreme end where people just want no development whatsoever. And I guess it's a sliding scale where the individual fits,
Sure.
And where government will say this is the right level that we want to take.
Sure, and not just governments, but also private organizations in between as well, and what they provide. But it's not just about the safety aspects, the safety risks. But if you think about encouraging people to use that, are you getting the benefits of people exercising more, getting out more? We are in a society where there's a lot of obesity, so I'm just touching on some of the benefits as well as the risk. But coming back to your question about the safety aspects of it, yes, that's foremost on government's mind. They don't want to be in the news creating a situation where people hurt themselves or they've not done everything they can to prevent somebody from either hurting themselves or dying. So that's a dilemma that they're faced with, in my opinion, and managing risk from the perspective of a government agency and how the public can be impacted. So these are key things which we as the community, as citizens, empower the government to do on our behalf. Sometimes we abrogate that responsibility, but it is everybody's responsibility to manage their own risk. And obviously, the people that we have voted into power, it is their responsibility to make sure that they do the right thing by us.
Yeah. So from a parks and wildlife perspective, they have to weigh up many, many factors, as you say. What's the process from a government point of view in determining what is an acceptable level of risk for the public, going into all those factors of costs and lives and management as well?
Generally, I would have to say that governments would be very reluctant to have a risk of death. So that's something that you will probably find as a policy statement, is that we conduct our activities with the aim to have zero death. Now, is that achievable? You just have to look at the mining industry to know that it is an aspiration. It's certainly something that we should try to achieve, but it's not always achievable. So there are what can be termed as inherent risks in the things that we do. It is inherently dangerous in some mining activities, in some rail activities, even the activities that is undertaken around housing construction. Climbing on top of a roof, fixing a roof. Molly Meldrum has fallen off a roof. So there are risks that are inherent in these activities, as well as the inherent risks of standing too close to the edge of Bluff Knoll, for example.
So I guess that's something that I guess I wanted to talk about, was that, I think hiking is an activity that has an inherent risk, and there's certain types of hikes, particularly I guess at the higher end of the scale of difficulty, where probably in order to do that there is there is a risk of death. And there are certain walks like Federation Peak in Tasmania where in a 10-year period you're likely to have a death. It's not a managed trail, but it is, it's something where government could go, oh, we're going to not allow people to do it. But in Tasmania, it is allowed, but it's done in a way that's very much like, it's up to you. We're not talking about it. We're not publicizing it, but it is something that people do.
That's interesting because obviously that's Tasmania. Do we have the same, and I'm going to use a term here, risk appetite for that? So does the government of Western Australia have a similar risk appetite of trails that may be a little bit more inherently dangerous than others? Or are the states sort of aligned in terms of the level of risk?
I think the states are quite different. I think WA is probably quite risk averse, would you say?
In some places, yes. In other places, no. In terms of Bluff Knoll and the Stirling Range, if we're going to talk about them, I think they can do to a certain level what they can to say, hey, here are the risks. It's now up to the person responsible. But then if you're looking at the Stirling Ridge Walk, they discourage people from using that. Whereas if they stepped in and said, hang on, we'll improve the facilities a little bit, they're taking a bit of that risk out.
Yeah.
So I think the amount of people that are interested in like a Stirling Ridge Walk is quite high, but the government doesn't cater to that risk appetite in WA, I wouldn't sort, compared to other states at least.
So, because I think a converse sort of example would be in Queensland, in the Glasshouse Mountains, they have a lot of walks that are quite potentially dangerous. People have died, and they don't promote them as walks, but they promote them more as like adventure activities. Mm-hmm. And they make the information available to the public, and so that people can make their own decisions. Whereas I think there, as Mark says, like Stirling Ridge is much more like not encouraged and talked about.
Yeah, and that probably brings us back to a key point about risk and risk awareness. So the rise in use of risk management ties in with wanting to know how to manage these things, whether or not it's preventing someone from dying, preventing a company from losing its customers through loss of reputation, that sort of thing. It's very important for us to decide as individuals and as organizations what we intend to, and I keep coming back to this, the objectives are. So if a government or an agency wants to encourage people to undertake more outdoor activities in the form of walks, then they should assess the risk in the Stirling Walk or whatever other walk there is to ensure that they are aware of the risk and can manage it. And managing it, sometimes people refer to this as mitigation. So how do you mitigate the risk with that? Do you have a constructed trail and railings all the way up to the top of Bluff Knoll? How does that impact on your other risk of aesthetics, of ensuring that the people who actually want to go and experience nature without railings?
I think we've certainly got it better than, say, like some places in the Blue Mountains where you get to a nice lookout or a rock and it's just this ugly chainmail fence. It kind of ruins the views a little bit. I'm happy they haven't done that on Bluff Knoll when they redid the trail.
Yeah, so those objectives of the attractiveness of the place have to be balanced by the agency or the government, and they would be looking at all of the different categories of risk and how they impact as a whole, and then making the determination, yes, we might be cynical in thinking that they might also not have walking trails or not encourage walking trails in certain areas because it's an opportunity to cut costs. Having less ranges available, have less signage. But it's important, in my opinion, to provide that information and signage to people so that they can make those individual decisions, which they may not be able to otherwise. Now, you mentioned before we got on the air about the walking trail standard. I realize it's not been updated in 2018 when it was due for an update, but let's just assume that it's still relevant.
Yeah.
There are five walking levels?
5 standards so the old standard used to be 6, but in the current Australian walking track standards, it's 5, and they've combined 6 and 5.
Yeah, I think that might relate to New South Wales, who assessed it as, look, 5 and 6 is pretty much the same, but I think the standard does say 6. Nevertheless, those standards themselves, while providing some information, have some conflicting information as well.
Yeah, I think that the standard from the government point of view when they're assessing the trail, I think it's pretty good. Like they're on the ball in terms of they go, okay, so these are the things that would be, so that it could be the length, it could be the type of terrain, the kind of how like well made the trail is. Those things are the things that govern the standard. But sometimes the blurb that they have at the trailhead, and I think WA is pretty good at putting signs at the start of trailheads, but sometimes it's just a very general, these are the things that may, like they basically just give the blurb of what a class 4 trail might be, but they don't always break it down into why it is. So for example, they might have a 40k walk like the Railway Reserves Heritage Trail that's flat and easy, or a walk that's quite challenging in terms of terrain, and that's both class 4 for different reasons, but it just says class 4 and doesn't break it down enough sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't seen this in sufficient detail to provide comment with regards to risk. It does seem more like a capability assessment, which is important in terms of a person assessing whether or not they are able or capable to undertake the activity. Risk itself is probably a little bit more specific in terms of what are the hazards that are on that particular trail or that particular section of the trail. How can I overcome these hazards? You can maybe not undertake that section itself. You can go around it. So there's lots of opportunities to apply risk management in terms of how the individual assesses this. But you can, as you mentioned, mitigate your risk or introduce controls, as we say in risk parlance, of carrying a personal locator beacon, which if you do get lost or if you do get into trouble, you can activate.
Yeah, I think WA is fairly good in providing additional information. So Frenchman's Peak down in Cape Legrand, it's a class 5 walk. But then there's a little caption saying, if it's wet or windy, do not attempt this walk, because it is up bare granite and gets quite slippery. So, and I think we're well catered for, especially in national parks where they do have the budget for signage.
I think the risk area signs, which sometimes we laugh at, are probably pretty good.
Yeah, because we have like a running count within our little chat group of all the different ones. There's like beach risk, cliff risk,
coastal risk,
B
risk area.
Tidal risk, everything.
And I guess it's comical, but you're probably
from the risk guy. I said totally valid.
And I guess kind of WA now has the beach identification numbers for most of the major beaches. So if you get caught in a rip or you're lost or whatever, you have that number that you can reference.
Right.
If you want to rescue or want the authorities to know where you are.
Well, that probably brings us. That's a good segue into bringing us to another activity that's risky in terms of surfing or getting into the ocean where there's lots of sharks as well. So there are inherent risks with that. Individuals should be given the information as to the shark activity, shark sightings, and all of the other things that they can make those decisions. So it really is no different from jumping into the ocean or setting off on a walk in terms of assessing that risk and deciding for yourself, is that within my risk appetite? Yes or no?
I guess, I mean, in terms of that, something that I guess probably have a bit of a bee in my bonnet over is, and I've said it too many times, but is that Bald Head in Albany is a fantastic walk, probably one of the best walks in the whole state, and it's not on Trails WA's top trails list. And that was because the local Parks and Wildlife Office said, oh, it's too risky. I guess the question I have there is, if there are signs, like they have the class of the trail at the trailhead, they have coastal risk area signs on a lot of it. They could have erosion risk signs in the areas that are eroded, because their complaint was that it's too eroded and not in good nick. I guess the question there is if that's something where they have dealt with those sort of aspects, like they've got the risk area signs, they've given people the advice. What's holding back that from being?
That's a valid question, and if you haven't yet asked them, maybe you could ask the right people for those responses. It's not about putting somebody in the spot, but getting that information so that you can yourself decide whether or not it is within your risk appetite. Not knowing what reasons they have for making those decisions, I obviously can't comment on that. You would hope that they would have rational reasons why that is so. But if it's one of those issues that you pointed out in terms of, is it coastal erosion or
so someone said to me that the reason was because it wasn't in good nick, because there's some parts of the trail that have become eroded over time.
Right.
But really, I don't think they're insurmountable problems.
Sure.
Particularly because
if you're short, yeah. Some of the drops are like a meter or longer.
I'm not tall. I can deal with it.
Yeah, so it does sound unreasonable, and those sorts of questions should be asked as to why, and if the walking community were to get behind you and ask for those answers, then they should be provided with those answers. In terms of governments and agencies, a lot depends on what the community or society accepts as the reasonable level of service or provision that determines what you're going to get. That sort of sets the policy agenda. So if the policy voices out there don't get behind those questions, then it's probably going to continue. So those are the sorts of things that you walkers out there should take account of and voice or ask those questions.
I mean, the government can stick up 100 different signs and people will still ignore them. Kind of a topic that will lead on to the next little section is, as kids, should we be taught more about risk and how it relates to everyday activities rather than just, you go swim with sharks, you're going to maybe get eaten? Should that be introduced earlier into school systems and curriculum?
That's a good question. It probably will be, because risk as a field of study itself has really come of age over the last decade or so. The big thing with risk management coming to importance was the global financial crisis, GFC, where a lot of people said, hang on, why didn't we see this coming? Why did we not see that all of these conditions was going to create such a catastrophic loss to so many people? So since then, what has been driven is the study of risk and how we can provide better governance to not just companies, but also to government agencies and anybody in a governance position. So I would hope that that would extend to probably first high school and then maybe into primary as well. You'll find risk coming more into the vernacular quite often now.
I guess in terms of other risks that there's other things like you said it's not just safety. There are things like environmental risk and
Cost.
yeah.
So some of the common risks are obviously you mentioned safety. Safety and the environment are normally top of the priority because we do have quite strong regulation in terms of ensuring that individuals are kept safe, particularly in the obviously in work safety and similarly in the environment as well, in protecting the environment. So you also have financial risk, which I mentioned. Reputation risk for the government is also very important because if an incident occurs that will impact on their reputation, they'll want to safeguard that. And all of these reasons, why governments would be risk averse or should be risk averse. Then there's also some of the other common categories are compliance, legal and compliance. So is somebody going to sue me because I didn't have the right signage at the right place, or it fell off and nobody replaced it? Compliance issues in terms of am I going to be taken to task by the courts or the police? So these are the main categories of risk, and holistically the government government agency would be looking at all of these different categories and assessing it in terms of what is the consequence if someone does fall off the edge of bluff null, which could be serious injury or death. So you get a really high consequence. Normally the common rating is say a 5, a number of 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being catastrophic. And then they'll also look at the likelihood. So how likely is this to happen? So this perhaps could explain why some areas are not advertised or encouraged for people to go. Because if less people go there, then the likelihood of the event is less likely to occur.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And moving on to personal risk, we've talked a lot about the government and what they can do to mitigate risk. But I mean, in the end, a lot of it comes down to personal awareness of the risks that you're taking in order to get to the top of a mountain or go fishing or whatever. Do you see that people are becoming maybe more risk averse, seeing other people do like extreme activities with social media and everything, or is it in response to the signage that is out there or the education that they're receiving?
I think it's probably both, and that's the beauty of us being individuals. We all can make our individual choice, and some people in these extraordinary times of COVID-19 are probably a little bit more sensitive to the dangers to their health. In one individual, it might mean that they also want to minimize the safety risk when they're making these decisions, whether that's correlated. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. So maybe they might. But on the other hand, if you lock down people for too long, it seems like they want to go stir crazy and go out as soon as they can, and maybe undertake more risky activities. At any rate, the individual choice, I agree, should be carefully thought out. You should stop and make that assessment. I'm reminded of Glenn Jakovich for some reason. I'm a really old guy, so where stop, assess, assess the risk,
make the changes,
and make the changes,
Think
or maybe
safe,
not.
Sam?
Yeah. So this coming from a safety background, sorry, but that's the sort of thing that you do remember, and maybe people should remember that when before they get too close to the edge of bluff null or too close to the edge of a cliff with erosion.
I think they need to bring those ads back. I'll see if we can find it and we'll post it on social media. I remember Think Safe, Sam.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, hiking, it doesn't seem like it has a lot of risk because you're just walking. But in matter of fact, there's a lot of risk when you break it down, especially like in WA where you've got hiking in summer has its own risks with heat and dehydration, bushfires. Then you're climbing up mountains, you're on the coast, there could be king waves. Like, there's a lot of risks that people need to think about. And I think that most like casual hikers don't really, like, it doesn't sink into them
Yeah.
a whole lot, which is why like you see people trying to climb up Les Moody Falls and there's a helicopter out trying to rescue them. I think, a lot of it comes down to the individual.
Mm.
When
I guess that ties into my thoughts regarding the fact that we have the walk track grading system.
Yes.
That should basically be able to give people a sense of their abilities. But as you say, like, people just think of walking as walking, and it's not. In mountain bikes, if you look at some of the Black Diamond trails, I look at that and I go, there's no way I'm doing that. I will get injured if I do that. But yet there's not that same thing with hiking, because sometimes people, I think, just think, oh, it's just walking, but it's not just walking.
Yeah, I think that's big because you're going so much slower, you don't think about it. Whereas mountain bikes, you put them on a mountain bike, they're like, well, I'm going to go fast now. And some people, you're going 15 kilometers an hour and they're wobbling everywhere and they're not sure. It's that confidence that you have to earn within yourself. Whereas hiking, yeah, it's just walking, as some people say.
But as you guys said, there's a whole spectrum of walking trails and the I guess difficulties levels as well. So that's the sort of thing I agree. We as individuals should be looking at, is this level within my capability? What are the specific risks that are involved with this? And yes, please look at the safety risks first. Those coastal risks, the erosion risks, the edge of the cliff risks. All of these things should be considered. And if you decide that it is within your risk appetite, by all means. But at least you've made that determination, or the consideration and determination yourself.
So I guess another topic that this kind of ties into is sort of ultralight hiking, where basically the ideal is the impossible goal of carrying nothing, and you want to get as close to that as possible. So that's sort of where that sort of ideal is, and it'd be like, oh, you'll drill holes into your toothbrush to make it lighter. And then at the extreme end of that, like some people refer to it as stupid light, where people make decisions. I think I wouldn't call someone who doesn't bring a PLB with them a stupid light hiker, but I would always bring a PLB with me, and I've assessed that that's something that's essential to carry, especially when there's no phone reception. I guess the stupid light is when, for example, you might be fine to just carry a small amount of water, but if you're in a desert area where it's a long time between those, that's where the stupid light area is. I from experience, you can know, like if you know the area, but I guess these are things that people make decisions about without maybe knowing per se. How does one make these assessments?
I think that's probably an important point you're making about experience, because quite often we find that the people who do get into trouble, unfamiliar with the area, or have completely unprepared. Quite often they are tourists. You hear of tourists getting swept off rocks because they're not familiar with the area, or having ventured off for a walk without the necessary water requirements or gear that they need. So if you look at the ultralight in the way you've described, it sounds like it is a conscious decision to try to carry as little as you can. And if you can, fine, but have you made the risk assessment of all of the things that you're not bringing, which you might need? So all of the things that we in the risk space would refer to as controls. So have you worked out the amount of water that you need? Are you carrying any contingencies? That's another probably important area that people need to think of. You might say, I'm going to go for an hour, but you might get lost and end up being there for 5 hours. So is there a contingency amount of water? Is there a contingency of the shoes that you're wearing that can take the unfamiliar terrain or the terrain that you weren't planning on?
I guess it's kind of like a nice parallel or metaphor. So like a Formula One car, it's designed to go for the exact amount for the race. So it's fueled to the end.
Yes.
compare that with like a normal passenger vehicle you're going to work, that car's going to last forever and it's got built-in
Yeah.
capabilities.
And I'm sure ultralight walkers consider themselves, in that sense as well.
Yeah.
In terms of Formula One-ing this.
Yeah.
But yes, please, for your own safety, for make the necessary assessments so that you can remain safe.
Because there is some people say somewhat arrogantly that you're packing for your fears, is what they say. But I think that there's a certain intelligence in sometimes packing for quite realistically possible scenarios.
Yes.
There's like, carrying things that are never going to happen or unlikely to happen, sure.
Yes.
But, a PLB, what does that weigh? Like,
A few hundred grams.
yeah. What's that really going to make a difference to your hiking? You know?
And maybe forego the other things, but carry the PLB. So at least in the emergency situation, you do have. That's probably a good segue into emergency plans. So another aspect of risk is informing your emergency plan. So what is your emergency plan in the event of, And this is where risk is meant to walk you through all of the different scenarios of emergencies. So running out of water, falling down the side of a cliff, injuring yourself, bleeding out, all of those things, Do the ultralight walkers decide to carry a first aid kit, or do they forego that and then run the risk of not being able to treat themselves should they injure themselves?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, as a long distance hiker, I'm always thinking, right, if I like sprain my ankle or I break my ankle or my leg or something, how am I going to get out of this situation, especially as a solo hiker? Like, it's good to always be thinking in the back of your mind, what if this happens? I can do this, and having maps, technology with you like a PLB, it's good to mitigate the risk and have a plan to get out if something does happen.
And the mitigation of the risk might be going in larger numbers. So instead of going alone, having 2 or 3 or more people. So at least, one can stay with the individual, another one can walk somewhere to get help. Those sorts of scenarios should be thought of and risk assessed.
I know certainly with Medikit, I've sort of added to the Medikit from cycling because I'm a very experienced hiker, but not as an experienced bike packer. And so I've learnt from that there were certain things that I've needed because I've crashed so many times and you bleed so much more as a cyclist that the Medikit has changed because there's things that, and this is from experience, whereas I think there are things that I wouldn't bring now because I know I don't need those because there are more things for hiking. Like, for example,
Band-aids instead of massive bandages and gauze.
Yeah, and I wouldn't bother with things for like blisters. Not that I've had blisters for years, but I always have something like that just in case. But for cycling, the biggest thing is I've needed massive gauze from having, big gashes because I've crashed my bike.
And this is another important thing because, a risk doesn't have to be or shouldn't be once-off activity. You should keep assessing your risks, and when you get more experience and you know what controls or other things you should be carrying, it does inform you better, and you know what to do and what not to do for the next time.
I mean, you've done that with the pea gravel. You see pea gravel and you go slower now. So
Yeah, exactly. I assess that and go, do I really need to get there so soon? No, I don't. I'd rather not crash my bike.
Yeah.
And another good tip, if you are going out in groups, is to always let people know where in your pack, say a PLB or a Medikit is. Because a lot of the time, like if you get bitten by a snake, you may be rummaging around someone's pack for minutes trying to find the snake bite kit. And that could be precious time to wrap it up and or even just call out for emergency help.
Yeah, or you've just now hit on another safety activity from Safety Guy. So make sure if you are in a group that you have a safety brief before you actually head off, stating things like this.
Just picturing the
What we
guys.
call a pre-start.
Yeah, picturing the guys up on the mine site and everyone feverishly listening to the safety brief.
It works.
So you've said to me that the opposite of risk is opportunity. And do you kind of want to talk about what that means?
Sure.
Yeah.
So risk is often seen negatively in terms of what are the things that can go wrong. And, by definition, we did say what are the uncertainties that can impact on your objectives. And your objectives are obviously to complete your walk safely, enjoy the walk while you're doing it, and come out the other end in one piece. So the upside of risk is that it also provides us with information. So information that you have thought about methodically and assess as, yes, as an ultralight walker, well, these are all the things that I definitely want to bring with me. Maybe foregoing some other stuff, but definitely the PLB as we had discussed. But I can then enjoy the walk because I know that I have peace of mind in terms of my safety. And if you're traveling in a group, the safety of others as well, because obviously you want to not just look after number one, but also your friends or relatives who are coming along enjoying the walk with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that comes down to a lot of people, especially when they're first starting out in activity, get quite anxious about what's out there and kind of what are the dangers and the risks. And having that experience, like you can look at somewhere and go, oh yeah, I've been in a similar situation before. You're not worrying all the time, and you can enjoy your experience because you've been and seen those risks and evaluated that they're not that bad.
Yeah, I agree, and get as much information as you can from blogs or from other information that you might find online, or information from government websites or the agencies that are responsible for providing you with that information. So get as much information as you can before that, so you are informed. And then you can make those risk assessments and decide for yourself. It's the key thing with risk is that it helps you with your decision making.
All right, we get to the fun bit now.
So I think Mark had some other questions that were unrelated to risk, but he didn't want to tell me what they were.
Okay.
Okay. Well, not that risk isn't a very important topic, an interesting topic as well. But while we have Donovan's father here, can we discuss what we have termed as, and Donovan calls himself Little Donny,
Right.
from when he was a kid? Can you tell us any fun or interesting stories about what Don was like growing up, and maybe if you can recall that trip to the Gloucester Tree when
Assess the risk here.
when he saw the Billman track sign, he thought, I wanted to do that?
Yeah. Okay. So the Gloucester Tree, for starters, I, even though I was a pilot in the Air Force many years ago, I was afraid of heights. So I assessed the risk as, am I crazy? Am I going to go up there? But Donny, little Donny, who was very young then, how old were you then, Don?
First time would have been like 12, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
so not quite a teenager yet, and he was determined to climb this tree. And I thought, well, as a parent, I will assess the risk and go with him so that he's not on his own. And should anything happen, I, as the adult, would be there for him.
Yeah, I didn't. I was in a similar situation a few weeks ago, and he wanted to climb the Gloucester Tree. I said, "You go for it. I'll stay with the bikes."
Well, he is an adult now, so
And I tell you what, it gets scarier every time.
yeah,
Like when I was 12, it was nothing.
right.
But now I find it every time I've done it, I found it more scary than the last time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll have to go again at my ripe old age.
Yeah.
What was he like as a kid? Was he always this stubborn and set in his ways?
Very determined, as his mother would say.
Okay, that's probably a better
So
euphemism for it.
he would be very adventurous. So whenever we, even within our neighborhood, whenever there were other kids, he would want to do something a little bit different. So instead of walking in the park, he would want to climb up the side of the hill on the side of the park, not just wander along the path as the other kids would do. So, and for him, it was always the long way is better. His best friend, poor Justin, suffered for many years from going the long ways better because Donovan wanted to do it.
Yeah, and we've heard about these adventures where he's just like, I'm just going to walk from Coogee to Mundaring and see how far it is.
Or along the train line.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because you did that. Was it Mandurah or Rockingham up to Joondalup?
Yeah, so it was Mandurah all the way. So I walked the whole Mandurah line and then up to the Joondalup.
See, talking about risk, I would have thought the risk of boredom would have been quite high there.
Those were the days when I was not driven by the aesthetics. It was more like how many kilometers could you do?
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably more what is it that I can push myself to achieve and do it. So his mother and I just resign ourselves to having a very strange son.
And like my grandmother can't believe that I'm always going hiking or cycling, and she's like, "It's so dangerous." And you
Yeah.
guys are really blasé about it.
We are because we've assessed the risk ourselves and the risk of losing our only child. Hope it doesn't happen, but we've now chosen not to tell his grandmother because she just worries too much.
That's a good idea. Did you get to a certain point, or was it too late when you saw him going and being all adventurous and thinking, do we need a backup here?
No, because we have Alyssa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very much less or more risk averse than Donovan. I think you balance each other out quite well.
Yeah.
No, but we obviously are very encouraged by the fact that he would be rational in making those decisions, and he would risk assess this before actually venturing out.
Who does? You're very thorough in your preparation, so it's not you're out on crazy adventures. You do your homework beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was fun. I don't think we'll ever get my dad on the podcast, so there's no payback for me. But thank you very much, Alan, for
No
coming
worries.
in. It's been
My
a
pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yep. Thanks, Dad.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode or any other episode of Real Trail Talk, then please rate us on whatever platform you're currently listening to us on. Ratings really help for us to reach an audience and for people who maybe are looking to learn about the outdoors in Western Australia and Australia in general. If you had any questions or any suggestions for future episodes, you can email us at realtrailtalk@gmail.com, or you can contact us through our social media channels. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.